Good morning, or maybe good afternoon, or good evening, whichever it is for you. I wanted to go ahead and record our next lesson in our Bible class schedule for the Edwards Lake congregation, and we will be finding ourselves in 1 Samuel chapter 4, and we're going to cover chapter 4 all the way through chapter 7. As we saw back in chapters 1, 2, and 3, we have a better picture of what's going on in Israel, or at least a more positive picture compared to the stories we found in the book of Judges. You've got this great story of faithfulness from Hannah and her husband Elkanah, the birth of Samuel, who seems to be a kind of beacon of hope among the Israelite people, and that's very uplifting to see. But in contrast, we have the story of Eli and his sons. Eli does, in and of himself, seem to be faithful, but he has some rotten sons. And those sons are engaging in sin at the door of the tabernacle. They are mistreating the sacrifices, and they're doing all sorts of things that they shouldn't be doing. And so God calls Samuel, and Samuel is to be the next judge of Israel and a priest in Israel who would help turn the people back to God. And that brings us to chapter 4, where we have a story of some of the things that Eli's sons are doing. Essentially, what they do in this story from an Israelite perspective is they lose God. What they actually do is they lose the ark, but in a kind of a sense, they lose God. The Philistines gather together and they attack Israel, and they actually defeat Israel. It says there in verse 2 that they struck down about 4,000 men on the battlefield. And the elders of the people go, why in the world does this happen? Why is it that we're having this problem? Let's bring the ark of the Lord's covenant from Shiloh. Then it will go with us and save us from our enemies. Well, they gather together the ark, they remove it from the tabernacle where it is supposed to be, and they march it with them into battle, thinking that having the ark with them will bring them victory, it will bring them salvation from their enemies. And in a sense, it kind of works because God has created such a reputation for himself in the way that he defeated Egypt, in the way that the people have conquered the land, that the Philistines, it says they panicked because they said a god has entered their camp. They're concerned because this God of the Hebrews, he's a powerful God, and they know who this God is, and they're concerned that this God is going to defeat them. But the Philistines fight the Israelites. Israel is defeated. The slaughter is severe. 30,000 of their soldiers die, including Hophni and Phinehas, who are the two sons of Eli, who are not known for their righteousness. The worst part of this is that the ark itself is captured, and the Philistines take it back with them to their home. Well, the rest of chapter 4 tells us the story of Eli and his reaction to the report. A soldier runs back to Shiloh and gives a report that the Israelites have been defeated, that the ark has been stolen, and that Hophni and Phinehas were killed in battle. And it says in verse 18, when he mentioned, he meaning the servant, the soldier, when he mentioned the ark of God, Eli fell backwards off the chair and he died. He had been a judge of Israel for 40 years at this point. But because of the bad news, because of what has happened, he reacts so severely that he falls off his chair and dies at the news that the ark was taken. I wonder, and this is conjecture on my part, but I wonder, because Eli is said to be blind, if he didn't even know that the ark had been taken. He seems surprised by the news that he's given. He seems surprised. And I don't know that it's because he believed the ark was some sort of talisman that would cause God to bring them victory. I think it's that he didn't know. He had no clue that the ark had been taken. And that's my particular take on this story. Well, Eli's daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, was pregnant with child, and she goes into labor because of the bad news that is reported, and she names the child Ichabod. Ichabod means the glory has departed from Israel, and it says that she named him that because both the ark had been taken and because of the death of Eli and her husband. She reacts so severely that she names her son after this tragic event in Israel's history. Chapter 5 tells us the story of what the Philistines did with the ark, and it causes them, in a sense, to lose their God. They put this captured God, this box, this Ark of the Covenant, in their temple, and it reads that they put it there beside the statue, next to the statue, in front of the statue. All those words kind of give this idea of they offer this God as a sacrifice to their God. They put it at their God's feet. Well, the next morning they wake up and they find that their God, Dagon, the big statue, had fallen with his face on the ground before the ark. And because they were idol worshipers the way they were, they just picked this big statue up and set their God back up into place. But the next morning they find that the statue has fallen again, and its hands had hit the threshold of their temple door and broke the hands off of their statue, and they realize something's afoot. And they stand their statue back up, and there's this interesting detail in there that verse 5, that is why still today the priest of Dagon and everyone who enters the temple of Dagon in Ashdod do not step on Dagon's threshold, meaning they consider the threshold to be powerful because the threshold broke their God. Well, God also sends plagues on the Philistines. It says in verse 6, the Lord's hand was heavy on the people. And they realize that things are going on, so they want to get rid of this ark, and so they send it over to Gath. And they hope that maybe Gath will be able to handle it. Well, God brings plagues at Gath, and so they send it to Ekron, another of their cities. And again, God sends plagues there, and so they send it back to Israel. It says, for the fear of death pervaded the city. God's hand was oppressing them. Well, they don't want this in their midst. They don't want this in their country. And so they send it back, and they want to get rid of it. That brings us to the next chapter, chapter 6, where the ark is returned to Israel. And you can even imply from that or infer from that this means God has, in a sense, returned to Israel. The ark's been missing for 7 months. It gets returned back with gifts of gold. And they basically, the Philistines do a test. They put it on a cart pulled by animals, and they just tell the animals to go. And depending on which way the animals go will indicate whether this punishment had been coming from God or whether it was just by chance punishment. Well, God makes it clear that he's the one sending the punishment on the people. When the ark gets back to Israel, they worship because it's been returned to Israel. But they also don't seem to have the right respect for it because they look inside of it, and because of that, God strikes 70 people dead. It ends up landing at the house of Abinadab, and they raise up his son Eleazar to take care of the ark. And you see that there at the beginning of chapter 7. Well, that brings us around full circle to another battle where the Philistines have gathered to fight the Israelites again. But this time, instead of it being the ark that goes before the people as some sort of good luck charm or some sort of talisman representing their God, instead Samuel leads the people and does so by putting God in front of them. He offers a sacrifice so that God will bless their battle, so that God will be at the front of what they're doing. And when that happens, it says that the Lord thundered loudly against the Philistines that day in verse 10. And it says he threw them into such confusion that they were defeated by Israel. God defeats Israel. And so Samuel raises up a stone, kind of a memorial stone, and he calls it Ebenezer because the Lord has helped us up to this point. And we find here at the end of chapter 7, I want to read verse 15 through the end. Samuel judged Israel throughout his life. Every year he would go on a circuit to Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, and would judge Israel at all these locations. Then he would return to Ramah because his home was there. He judged Israel there, and he built an altar to the Lord there. Samuel is presented as a great servant of God, a great deliverer of God's people. Samuel does the job that we wanted all the judges to do up until this point. And he really does an exceptional job of making the people turn back to God and realize who God is and what God is capable of. What an awesome servant of God he turns out to be. Go ahead and read 1 Kings chapters 8 through 10 in preparation for our next video, where we will dig into some great ideas and teachings from this story of 1 Samuel.